Our last item on the agenda, you've been very patient, sitting over there, is this is one of our, is this our last?
Yes.
Okay, this is the last presentation of services that we have been putting out on relating to homelessness. And tonight we have the Together Place, and Sean Faircloth is here to run us through that.
Good evening,
Welcome, Sean.
councilors. I demand equal time. For what? And then Councilor Trimble, I believe, has to be here to listen to it all. All right, I'm Sean Faircloth, Executive Director of Together Place Peer Run Recovery Center. Thank you for having me join you this evening. I'm just going to get a little concise profile of our organization, and some of which relates to the homeless population. Our program director couldn't be here. She was making another presentation tonight, although I think hers was falling over. But anyway, our primary offering at Together Place Peer Run Recovery Center is certified intentional peer support specialists. And what that means is people who themselves are in long-term recovery. They go through a special training process to work with people in either mental health or substance use recovery. And that's an important underlining I want to make. Obviously, and we employ to some degree some recovery coaches, and those folks do excellent work. Certified intentional peer support specialists, which we end up calling SIPs, are trained to work with both mental health and substance use. And I think that's significant because dual diagnosis is so often a component of a lot of the issues that we're addressing. As some of you probably know, a few years ago, the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, said that substance use is actually one of many mental health diagnoses, but people usually kind of think of them as separate. And with a lot of the population we serve, it often is the case. We are a daytime facility, 8 to 5, 8 to 4, Monday through Friday, open to the public. And partly just due to geography, and I'm going to expand upon that, we don't have an exact census. And I was listening to some of the definitions in a conversation earlier about what does homeless mean. We don't keep that kind of data, but nearing 50% of the folks we serve are homeless. But by that, I would include couch surfing, because I watched that earlier conversation. It's sort of a general diagnosis here rather than they would use for some of the housing criteria like CHCS, for example, was discussing. What they offer, what the SIPs primarily do day to day, is recovery groups or one-on-one sessions. And we have a whole multiplicity of recovery groups. And when I'm done, I'll hand you some documentation of some recovery groups we offer. So there's recovery groups that have to do with substance use. And by the way, the waterfront, obviously in the world we live in, opiates are the first thing that come to mind, but we do, plain old fashioned, alcohol, substance use, whole range of substance use issues and mental health issues as well. We deal with a range of mental health issues. So we even have a group called Hearing Voices, which, has to do with severe diagnosis, including schizophrenia, people dealing with depression. So there's a sort of a waterfront of groups we offer. It's all free, you don't even have to do main care paperwork. You just say, I need help, and you walk through the door. Obviously, there's been a big challenge with, recent years with the population we serve, because there's always an issue of isolation, particularly with our folks. But when you have a pandemic, it further exacerbates that issue. I'm going to return to that, but I'm just to add there's two other components to Together Place Peer Run Recovery Center. One is we offer an employment program. This is for folks, they have to have some form of diagnosis and working with a job coach, and that's like working on cleaning buildings and that sort of thing. Then we also do some property management for what is a separate corporation, Together Place Housing, and provide some low-income housing for people who, again, this is specifically for a mental health diagnosis population. So to qualify, you have to be low income and you have to have a documented diagnosis. So we do some property management with that. And I will say we're proud with some of the work we've done. We recently took over the property management operations, not a huge number of units, very small actually, but we had a couple of buildings and we've worked hard to improve those buildings. They become kind of long in the tooth and, done what we can to be good citizens about improving those buildings and those housing properties under that management. But the main offering is the recovery services. And we've really worked hard to do a good job with that. And I think our niche that's somewhat distinct, if you will, is partly related to our geography. I mean, if you know where we're located at Second Union with the big murals there, we are right near the shelter. We're neighbors with the Shaw House, the Brick Church, which is a couple doors down, Pickering Square, Davenport Park. A lot of the areas that come under discussion, we try to invite and welcome people in. Now, we have a certain very significant portion of the folks we serve who are not homeless and come for our services. So I don't want to convey, that's all of the folks we serve. But I think the geography where we are sort of lends itself to really working with what I think is a combination of issues. It was discussed earlier about, the difference in the 90s, compared to now with opiates, and it is significant. And I've, witnessed that myself over the years of how more difficult it is. And I think there's a combination of issues, mental health, substance use. Unfortunately, suicide rates have gone up. Unfortunately, suicide rates are higher in Maine than the national average, just like our overdose rate is higher than national average. And I guess I don't need to tell you, but Eastern Maine, Penobscot County, Washington County, Saskatchewan County, 3 highest overdose rate counties, and consistently for years now, including the last report from January to May. And I guess I don't need to tell this audience, like I often sort of underline for others, it's the reality that a lot of times if you live in Washington County or you live in Saskatchewan County and you need services, you do end up in Bangor for those services. And a lot of times they end up, some significant portion end up in lower income housing. And a lot of times it's that housing that's kind of that ring of area that's surrounding the downtown property. So like the lower numbered streets, the streets on the downhill side of Thomas Hill, those neighborhoods have, and your own city maps where I actually looked at some of the data show the high ratio of renter to owner properties, and frankly, a lot of times lower income. Then we have a lot of great landlords as well. So that's a lot of the folks just because they're within walking distance that we serve. And so we've really tried to turn ourselves, in addition to all the recovery groups that I've talked about, we've tried to be good citizens in our neighborhood. Our building was frankly kind of run down a few years ago, and we've worked to really lift up the building interior and exterior. And then we've tried to look outward. And with our members, this is a peer-run recovery center. What that means is that the majority of our fiscal board are people who themselves have a diagnosis, and the floor peer-run recovery center, who run the activities on the floor, that's 100% of people who are themselves in recovery who run that operation. And those are folks a lot of time who face some of the issues I've just described. So it's empowering for them. And some of the things that we've worked on trying to help be good neighbors. We started a neighborhood cleanup. We held one last year. We held one again this May. We intend to make that kind of a tradition for us so that our members are working to be community servants and involved in community service. We also hold events welcoming the general public. We have a statewide creative writing contest. It's actually next Thursday. You're all invited a week from Thursday. And at that, we have a writer of reputation who comes and issues awards to people who themselves participate in a creative writing contest. They do a reading, just as the guest author does a reading. And we're building that into a tradition in our community. We have mural projects that we've done on our own building, and now we're working with Shaw Supermarket, where we're going to be adding murals to help that section of the city to lift it up. And our members are directly involved, like they assist with the mural. So it's empowering to the people who a lot of times come from difficult situations. We're going to hand out an article at the end of this with a young woman who would identify with a significant diagnosis, and she read from her creative writing work at our last year's creative writing festival, and she described how meaningful it was to her to be recognized in that fashion. So we're trying to put it where our members are in places where they're making a difference. We've also joined a coalition that some of you may be familiar with, Penobscot County Cares, which is a coalition of over 30 organizations that speak for 3 priorities: mental health, substance use, and affordable housing. And we try to participate in all those, one of which housing through the separate corporation, but try to address all 3 of those issues. And I would say it's a big deal, this challenge of isolation, especially in these neighborhoods. People can't utilize our services if they don't know about our services. So we've done some outreach where we go out and literally go to talk to people at the door. How you doing? Can we help you out? To try to really be neighbors in the community. So I think we have a unique offering. We're part of this Penobscot County Cares Coalition, where I support all of our fellow organizations. But I feel like we're trying to help to do our part, both in terms of direct mental health and also in terms of this combination of socioeconomic issues. They sometimes call it deaths of despair. And I feel there's a significant concern there in our community. So I'm happy to answer questions. If it's appropriate, I will hand out some materials about Together Place.
Questions, Councilor Fournier?
So how many units do you have?
It's not many, it's 9. Actually, there was a fire, and it wasn't, we know, I talked to the chief, it wasn't our fault. But we had a fire at an adjacent building, and propane tank went up, and so it took down one of our buildings. Luckily, no one was hurt. Very luckily, no one was hurt.
So is it just the one property?
We have 2 properties, yeah.
That's right there.
We have one, no, we have Together Place property, which maybe you're thinking of. Then a separate corporation, Together Place Housing, has a property on High Street, which we've recently redone and improved. And we have another one on Center Street Avenue that we've also been improving. These are quite old buildings, but we've tried to make them more, sound inside and out.
So how many people do you see?
At the recovery center or at the housing? Because housing is only 9 units.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's not.
No, it would be recovery.
No, recovery, hundreds of people over the course of the year. Yeah, no question. We keep records of people who come and visit. Now, some people come and they'll only come for one day and they won't even use our services. We have a little luncheon diner available where people can get hot food for EBT. Sometimes people come in for that. But ours is kind of, you can't, and it's against our rules anyway, to mandate anybody to do anything. Sometimes we have folks who will come in who volunteer because they are in drug court or whatnot, and then they start participating in our groups. And that's our philosophy, is there's no force, there's no requirements, and there's no financial requirements. You could be the richest person in town. We want you to come in. But we work to try to welcome as many as we can. And then some people, they say, oh, I'm going to start participating in a recovery group. And some people don't stick with it, some do. I mean, and also another challenge we have, particularly where we are, is just like a lot of this population comes and goes. They come in, they're there for a few months, they live in an apartment for a while, and then they're gone. But then we have others who've been loyal customers, for lack of a better term, who come for recovery groups, multiple ones a week, because it helps them.
Do you break it down between mental health and substance abuse?
In the sense that we have by group names, and that's why I probably should have my program director here, but so we'll have, like I say, there's a group called Alternatives to Suicide. Now, someone could be have a substance use diagnosis and also be looking at that issue as well. So a lot of people, I would say probably the majority of our folks are folks who what you would traditionally call dual diagnosis. But by the types of groups, you can tell, like there's Smart Recovery, which is obviously it's focused, or the colloquially means recovery for substance use issues. So there's several that are focused on substance use cessation, but a lot of the others are mental health. And our philosophy and why I think it's also a distinct offering is that, understandably, like a lot of recovery coaches, it's about substance use, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good offering. But for our folks, because they're trained with both mental health and substance use, a lot of times, I would say the majority of times, people, it's both. And so we try to get people in multiple groups.
Thanks.
Councilor Yacob.
Thank you. So I have two questions, please. The first one, how do you have 9 units, you said? 9 units.
Yes.
How do those individuals pay to stay at those units?
It's similar to other low-income housing, like I think you had CHCS or whatever here, so that you have to have an income low enough to qualify, just like, a lot of times, in our case, it's people who are SSI or SSDI eligible. They pay 30%, and it's covered through a pass-through through Fed and state money for the rest of it.
Thank you. My second question is, how did COVID affect the numbers that you guys?
Significantly. We tried to adjust, we've actually carried on with Zoom, but we didn't have Zoom before as part of our groups. And now we had them intensively, obviously, during the pandemic. And so we were able to keep a lot of people on, and oddly we got somebody who came in and joined a recovery group who lived in Nevada. But since the pandemic is at least tapering or whatever it's doing, now we're much more back to in person, but we've still retained the Zoom feature. So we have people coming that way as well. Yeah, so it was very difficult. And that's part of our outreach. We're doing some outreach now, particularly in the area I'm talking about, like the 1st, 2nd, 3rd Street, that kind of section of town. Because a lot of people say you've got significant depression, and you live alone in a apartment unit. Like some people, they might be in like, say, if you're in a housing authority, sometimes they have activities and whatnot that are based in the housing authority. But if you're on, some of these streets and just rental apartments, you don't have that, and you're kind of can be a pretty isolated person. So we've literally gone out and tried to meet people where they are, and that's part of like our neighborhood cleanup, as we draw people. And then this last time to Talbot Park to get people out of the homes, offer some food.
So maybe I should have asked the question in a different way.
Yes.
So what I meant by my question, did you feel that COVID affected more individuals in different ways, mental health wise, addiction wise, finding apartments, housing wise? So this is
certainly in ways of depression and addiction, like our staff is talking about people who they were increasingly isolated and had greater difficulty emotionally, and also I think in terms of relapse, in terms of substance use. And I think unfortunately the numbers, back that up.
So now we have been discussing ARPA money for quite some time, but we just started the real conversation discussions, and we came to a point of so what are the issues that we have to address? What are that need attention and spending from ARPA money? And
when you said from our
ARPA money.
ARPA.
ARPA money.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So we said that housing is number one, or it was the issue that we came up with in our last discussion last week. But there were discussions about sustainability for the housing, affordable housing. How can we have affordable housing that in a way support the population that you guys serve while still make it sustainable for the city?
Well, I don't claim to be a housing expert, and we simply do the management for this Together Place Housing. It's member run, by the way. Together Place Housing, the members, the people with the diagnosis it's kind of like their condo association. They have a financial interest because it operates like a nonprofit, but they make the decisions for the property, which is very empowering to them. My own opinion is there should be significant, you're asking, significant greater investment in all three. That Penobscot County Cares advocates for. So investment in housing. I think maybe there could be direct investment by the city if they wanted to invest further and directly in property. There's also organizations that manage property and property for people who face issues like substance use and mental health diagnoses that I think it's worthy to maybe support those organizations where they have that management capability. I think it's worthwhile. And obviously, in addition to that, and this is maybe not directly answering your question, but I just think there's an added factor of, I think there's sections of the city that need attention and focus. And like, I would include those streets around, like within walking distance of downtown, that whatever we could do to help build community and Together Place is trying to participate in this, I think is really important, because I think there's a lot of folks in those sections of town who feel like, when I talk, you use that phrase, or you hear the phrase deaths of despair, not necessarily deaths of despair, but people who feel isolated, they don't have a sense of community for them. And I feel like if there's investment in organizations that bring people together, that would be really meaningful.
No, I don't want anyone to respond to me.
Councilor Spray.
Sean, could you talk us through the sources of your financing?
Yeah, the primary source of our financing is a state contract. So like a lot of times organizations will have like a Medicare reimbursable type of arrangement. We don't have that. It's a straight grant that frankly has not been increased in recent years. I somewhat have concerns about that because I feel like, understandably, substance use has gotten a great emphasis. It should. I'm glad it's getting a great emphasis. But that Together Place started from mental health, and it originally was Together Place Social Club, which was part of a consent decree back in the 70s and 80s, letting people out of the institutions, and that's where that first funding came from for the straight grant. So then I think they saw us as mental health first, and therefore not substance use, or that became kind of a perception of the peer-run recovery centers. And so for whatever reason, they haven't put as much emphasis on it. But I say it should be the opposite, or not the opposite, because I think they should support substance use entities, absolutely. But that the mental health substance use combination is maybe not been invested in as much on the state level. But to answer your question flat out, it's primarily a state contract, and the amount of it has not changed in a number of years.
My follow-up to that, it's not particularly about you, and others have heard me ask this question, but I ask it pretty much to everybody who's come in. It's an observation, and then you can react to it. My observation is that we have tens of millions of dollars coming into the greater Bangor area to support housing and to support substance use disorder, treatment, substance use disorder treatment. That there's a lot of money coming into this area. We've talked to multiple different organizations. My supposition going in, and I've been really listening carefully so that I could change my mind. But my observation going in is that the approaches to housing and the approaches to dealing with substance use disorder are highly fragmented across multiple organizations, and that there's a lot of inefficiency. And that because we have so many not-for-profits kind of doing their own programs, multiple boards, multiple groups of volunteers, multiple programs, all sorts of recovery coaches, all sorts of housing coordinators across multiple organizations, that there is probably as much money being wasted in the system as people are asking for from our ARPA dollars. And what I hear is a lot of organizations saying, well, you should channel some of the ARPA dollars to us, or to these issues, to us, to existing organizations, build more housing. But I don't hear anybody coming together and saying, 6 of our organizations have gotten together and decided that we're really inefficient operating separately. We've decided to merge together to capture the efficiencies of this. We're going to align our funding sources. And then, oh, by the way, we have a plan for what we can do together, and we need some economic support. Nothing like that. So I'm trying to noodle this through, but I think that we have a extremely great group of organizations, people really doing things they care about and doing really kind, good work in a very fragmented way. And I find that's a source of a lot of frustration for me in terms of how I view this. So I'd be interested. You've been on the council, you have a great sense of a lot of these issues, but
Well,
how would you react to that?
Well, one, I will say that Penobscot County Cares is a step in the direction you're referring to. This is over 30 organizations that have joined together to speak out on these issues. And I think that might be a forum where there could be further discussion of efficiencies. I will say that in the recovery world in this city, if anything, that the investment is low. And I'm not saying that, I would say that before I got into this position, simply by the demographics of Eastern Maine. I mean, the numbers don't lie. And I think they precede any of us in a sense, in terms of the economic issues combined with, Nolan's here, but I used to be a drug prosecutor in the 90s, and opiates were just a rounding error. They existed around here, but it was, if it exists, I remember they had some, like in Lewiston. It was a totally different world in Eastern Maine compared to the situation we are facing now. I mean, this is an epidemic. And I also say in terms of mental health, and I think the numbers back this up. And say advice, but I think I'm being sincere with you about this, that I think the mental health is somewhat of a neglected sector of this issue in Eastern Maine. As you look at the stats in Maine, unfortunately, higher suicide rate, there's a lot of issues. And I think, you asked me, but I think there's some combinations with socioeconomic issues that are really troubling for people, and people feel kind of left out. So I do think there's a need for greater investment. I totally don't object, and in fact support the idea of let's try to coordinate between organizations. I would say directly, and I feel like I should do it in my role here, as certified intentional peer support specialist with this dual training in mental health and substance use. There's just not a lot of them around here. We're the city. Bangor's the city for this giant geography. And I feel like there should be, more investment in that. And that's not to take away from the other organizations. That's, my philosophy is there should be a greater investment. But I'll tell you, I, for one, and I think I was going to say I can't speak for others, but I'd say I can speak for others to some degree, is that I think those organizations would be very open to saying, maybe there's ways to come up with efficiencies. But I hope that, quest for efficiency doesn't undercut the fact that I think there is a very basic need for investment in these issues.
Thank you. But let me clarify just one thing. I'm not interested, what I'm looking for is not just interested in economic efficiencies. I'm interested in program alignment that leads to greater impact. By better alignment of funding in ways that can have more demonstrable results, not just economic efficiencies. So I may have missaid that, but that's what I'm looking for.
I'll tell you more sometime, because I wouldn't mind combining organizations if there was something that was mutually beneficial. You got to find some organization that wants to do that.
Anything else? Sorry.
No,
I thought you took your hand down.
I know, so if everyone's all done, I think we talk about this issue a lot, and we sort of forget the human emotional side of it. And I know obviously we're on a committee where, we need to take these decisions and talk about them as methodically and logically as possible. I can't do that today. I had a close family friend who OD'd this weekend, and my family's grieving right now. And I want everyone who's watching and everyone here to understand that this is a very real issue. And it's, this isn't just something to talk about like it's, how are we going to fix the numbers or whatever? These are people's lives that we have to deal with and we have to help. John, thank you for what you're doing. Thanks for everyone for being here. I just, sorry, I just want to make sure that we all understand that this is not just something that is just a talking point. These are people's lives. And we need to do our best as leaders and as community members to tackle this issue in every way, shape, or form. Of course, we're going to have different philosophies on how we discuss this issue, but this is a disease of despair. And when it affects one of us, it affects all of us. It's not just one member of this community that we're losing. We're also losing a huge heap of support from all these other sectors and groups of people. So, Sean, thank you for all you're doing. And thank you everyone for listening. Sorry.
I just want to, very sorry for your family's loss. I lost my cousin in the pandemic in Florida after years of his mother trying to get him treatment with all the resources in the world. And finally he lost his battle with addiction. And I recently both read and watched Dope Sick, and hearing Maine specifically, we were targeted. And I grew up in Washington County, and I graduated in 1993, and my sister in 1996. I'm looking at you because you know the years. And my sister and I both think we just missed it. And we look at people who came behind us and people who stayed there and who stayed and worked in the mills and worked blue collar jobs and were injured and were given the best painkiller in the world. And to watch and read Dope Sick, which I would recommend to anybody who is trying to get their mind around what has happened over the last 25 years. It's a great book. And every time it says Maine, I was in DC at the end of the month with Girl Scouts, and the other Girl Scout leader is a counselor and deals with people with substance use disorders. And there was a sign for the Sackler Gallery, and we made a rude gesture in front of it out of just despair. And what else can you do? But it's just to look at how Maine has been targeted. And when you say they come from Washington County, my parents' doctors are in Bangor. They are this is where they come to get prescriptions filled. It's just, this is the center. And as those rural areas are being carved out, what's left behind is often, a lot of despair, a lot of mental health issues, and continuing substance use disorders. In the old days, it was blue laws, and the old guys would buy vanilla on Sundays, and that seems quaint now when you think about how substance use has changed the fabric of our state. And I just wanted to, as those of us that are in the business of trying to make these decisions and understand the history of it, I would recommend, if you can't watch it, read it. If you can't read it, watch it, or do both, because it was really enlightening.
Anything else?
Thank you very much. And thank you for your comments on, I think it was June 11th. Members and staff held memorial for people who were lost. And we usually hold events where it's a reading of poetry or, a neighborhood cleanup. But this one, it was just very emotional to watch people talk about their friends who are gone. And from all socioeconomic stripes around this community in a way, like I say, that we just didn't see it in the same degree.
We're all seeing it now. Well, thank you, Sean. It
Thank
was,
you very much.
Thank you.
and for bringing the article and the information that we can.
Yep, there's
Take
materials
and-
about some of our work, and thank you
I
very much.
appreciate your patience.
Thank you for being patient with me. I was like, oh, boy.
You're the
I'm
one
gonna
that
say
was
thank you
here
for
at 5
goodbye.
o'clock.